One way to think of the soul as Plato is imagining it, or as Socrates is imagining it, is to compare the soul with the number three, which he does. A big example that he gives, page 57, 58, 59, is trying to understand the concept of oddness, when it comes to numbers, even and odd numbers, and its relation to the number three. That whenever we are dealing with the number three, we are also dealing with oddness. Yet the number three and oddness, the concept of three and the concept of oddness, are not identical. It's just that we know that three is an odd number. So if we have three, we also have oddness. It doesn't work the other way around, right? Because there are more odd numbers than three. If we have oddness, we don't necessarily have three. But the idea is that the number three, I suppose, participates in the form of oddness, or part of the essence of the number three is that it is odd. And so it would never admit of evenness. It would be, let's say, against the nature or against the essence of the number three to become even. It's just unthinkable because the number three is essentially odd. If the number three became even, it would no longer be the number three. It would be something else. It's kind of an interesting idea, or an interesting way of looking at it. And I think that he is using that as a way of conceiving of the soul, except that we're not talking about the number three and oddness. We're talking about the soul and life. And I think the key idea is that just as oddness is an essential aspect of the number three, that life is an essential aspect of a soul. Let's see if we can follow that up a little bit in the text. This is on page 60. He asks here, he says, then tell me, what is that which must be in a body to make it alive? A soul, he replied. And is this always so? Of course, he said. Then the soul always brings life to whatever contains her. No doubt, he answered. So just as whenever we have the number three, or the number five, or the number seven, etc., we also have oddness. Whenever we have a soul, whenever there is soul present, there is also life. Interesting analogy. Let's follow it up a little bit more here. This is page 60 again. Then the soul always brings life to whatever contains her. I'm right here. No doubt, he answered. And is there an opposite to life or not? Yes. What is it? Death. And we have already agreed that the soul cannot ever receive the opposite of what she brings. That is, yes, certainly we have, said Sebes. Well, what name did we give to that which does not admit the idea of the even, the uneven, he replied. And what do we call that which does not admit justice or music? The unjust and the unmusical. Good. And what do we call that which does not admit death? The immortal. So just as the number three does not admit of the opposite of oddness, which is evenness, so the soul does not admit of the opposite of its essence, which is life. And the soul does not admit death. No, then the soul is immortal. It is. Good, he said. Shall we say that this is proved? What do you think? Yes, Socrates, and very sufficiently. Well, Sebes, he said, if the odd had been necessarily imperishable, must not three have been imperishable? Of course. And if cold had been necessarily imperishable, snow would have retired safe and unmelted. Whenever warmth was applied to it, it would not have perished, and it would not have stayed and admitted the heat. True, he said. And then we skip down to the middle of the page. And must we not say the same of the immortal? He asked. If the immortal is imperishable, the soul cannot perish when death comes upon her. It follows from what we have said that she will not ever admit death, or be in a state of death, any more than three, or the odd itself, will ever be even, or fire, or the heat itself, which is in fire cold. Well, I mean, I don't know how much sense that makes at this point. I think we'd have to go over it in detail. But I just wanted to present that idea that what his final argument here for the immortality of the soul really is a very sort of complicated idea of how things relate to their essences, what he would call their forms. And this analogy with the number three that essentially that the soul couldn't die any more than the number three could become even. The number three is essentially odd. And the notion that it could be even and still be the number three doesn't make any sense. The soul is essentially life. That's what makes it soul, is that it is alive. It could not admit the opposite of life, death, any more than three could admit evenness. That is, it's a logical absurdity. So whenever you have soul, whenever soul is, whenever soul is present, it brings life. So the notion of a dead soul really doesn't make any sense. It'd be like an even three. Interesting, something to think about. This is a very difficult part of the dialogue, so we'll do our best with it. But it would seem that we really do have to pay attention to it because it is Socrates' last and most strenuous effort to prove that the soul is not the kind of thing that can die. That we shouldn't worry about dying because the idea of death does not apply to the soul. And I think this is his argument, that it just doesn't make sense to say that the soul dies. It would be like saying that the number three becomes even.